It's just a worthless Omega, Your Majesty. I bought her from Ironridge. Wild lavender, mountain pine. You're the man from the cave.
My king, you know.
They traded her for 3 crates of winter provisions and a dozen silver daggers. To them, she was a useless, broken Omega, tossed to a cruel rival pack to rot. But they made a fatal mistake. They had no idea the savage Alpha King was already tearing the continent apart looking for her. The winter of 1243 was merciless. It froze the rivers of the Northern Territories solid and brought the Ironridge Pack to its knees. In the great hall of the Stone Keep, the fire in the hearth barely cast enough warmth to melt the frost on the windows. Aveline Mercer knelt on the unforgiving flagstones, her thin woolen dress offering no protection against the biting chill. She was an Omega, the lowest-ranking wolf in the pack. But she had not always been. Once, she was the daughter of the former Alpha, a beloved child of the woods. That was before the sickness took her father, before her older stepbrother, Desmond, usurped the title. Desmond ruled with an iron fist and a heart carved from ice. He despised Aveline. To him, her lack of an aggressive wolf spirit and her gentle nature were a stain on the pack's fierce reputation. "Stand up, Aveline." Desmond's voice echoed through the cavernous hall. It was sharp, devoid of any familial warmth. Aveline kept her eyes lowered, her bare feet numb against the stone. "Yes, Alpha." Before her stood Desmond and another man, one whose scent made the hairs on Aveline's arms stand up. It was a rotting, metallic stench blood and damp earth. This was Castor Morland, the Alpha of the Shadowfell Pack. Shadowfell was a brutal faction known for their barbaric practices and their willingness to raid neighboring villages. They were rivals to Ironridge, yet here Castor stood, sipping spiced wine from one of Desmond's silver goblets. "She is small," Castor noted, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. He circled Aveline, his heavy leather boots thudding against the floor. "Barely looks like a wolf at all. You sure she can work, Desmond?" "She has stamina," Desmond replied coldly, not even looking at her. "She does the wash, chops the kindling, and cleans the kennels. She knows her place. An Omega who doesn't fight back. You need servants for your keep, Castor. I need winter provisions. It is a fair trade." Aveline's breath caught in her throat. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. Trade. He was selling her. "Desmond, please," Aveline whispered, breaking protocol. She looked up, her gray eyes wide with terror. "I am your sister. Do not send me to Shadowfell. I will work harder. I will take on the night shifts." A vicious backhand struck her across the face before she could finish the sentence. The crack echoed off the stone walls. Aveline crumpled to the floor, tasting the sharp tang of copper in her mouth. "You will speak when spoken to, Omega," Desmond snarled, his eyes flashing a dangerous amber. "You are not my sister. You are a drain on my resources." Castor has offered 3 crates of salted venison, 50 sacks of grain, and 12 silver-forged daggers. That is more worth than you have provided this pack in your entire miserable life. Castor laughed, a cruel hacking sound. "I like to break the quiet ones. Put her in the cart." The transition was violent and swift. Aveline was not permitted to pack her few meager belongings, a wooden comb her mother had given her, a small piece of blue ribbon. She was dragged by the hair by Castor's guards, shoved into a wooden cage in the back of a horse-drawn wagon. The iron bars were freezing, biting into her skin as she huddled in the corner. As the wagon lurched forward, Aveline watched the gates of Ironridge close behind her. Her home, her prison, and now, a place she would never see again. The journey took 3 agonizing days through the blizzard. The guards tossed her scraps of hardtack and frozen snow for water. Aveline shivered violently, her wolf whining piteously within her spirit. Omegas were empathetic creatures, deeply tied to the concept of pack and family. To be severed from one's pack, even an abusive one, was a physical agony, a tearing of the soul. Yet, as the dark, jagged spires of the Shadowfell Keep came into view against the gray sky, Aveline clung to a single, secret memory. It was a memory that Desmond did not know about, a memory that kept the embers of her spirit alive. a memory of a savage, golden-eyed wolf in the dark. To understand Aveline's silence, one had to look back 3 years to the blood moon of 1240. Aveline had been foraging for medicinal herbs in the disputed territory between Ironridge and the southern wastes. It was dangerous work, but as an Omega, she was forced to take the risks the warriors refused. Deep within a limestone cavern, hidden behind a waterfall, she had found him. He was not just a wolf, he was a monster of a lycan, massive and cloaked in fur as black as pitch, bleeding out on the cavern floor. He had been ambushed, poisoned with silver-laced arrows that still jutted from his flank. Most wolves would have run. A dark wolf of that size was an alpha, and a dangerous one. But Aveline's Omega instincts the urge to heal, to soothe overrode her fear. For 7 days and 7 nights, she stayed in that cave. She brewed poultices of kingsfoil and yarrow. She painstakingly extracted the silver arrowheads, searing the wounds shut while he growled and thrashed in fevered delirium. When he finally shifted back into his human form, he was magnificent, broad-shouldered, scarred, with eyes the color of molten gold. He never told her his name, and she never offered hers. There was a mutual understanding that their meeting was a dangerous anomaly. But in the quiet hours of his recovery, he had looked at her with an intensity that burned straight through to her soul. He had buried his face in the crook of her neck, inhaling deeply. Lavender, he had rasped, his voice raw. Wild lavender and mountain pine. I will never forget this scent, little bird. When he was strong enough to stand, he left in the dead of night. Aveline returned to her life of servitude, convinced it was nothing more than a fever dream. She did not know that the nameless, bleeding man she had saved was Lucius Hawthorne, the newly ascended Alpha King of the Unified Territories, who had been ambushed by traitors. She did not know that for 3 years he had been systematically slaughtering his enemies, consolidating his power, and searching every corner of the continent for the scent of lavender and pine. Now, Aveline was a prisoner in Shadowfell. Her arrival at the keep was as degrading as expected. Castor Morland stripped her of her Ironridge garments and forced her into the coarse, scratchy burlap of the lowest scullery maids. She was assigned to the dungeons, tasked with cleaning the blood and filth from the interrogation rooms. It was back-breaking, horrific work. One evening, a month into her captivity, a frantic energy swept through the Shadowfell keep. Aveline, scrubbing the stone steps leading down to the crypts, paused as she heard the heavy boots of guards rushing past. "Did you hear?" whispered Maeve, an elderly human servant who worked alongside Aveline. Her eyes were wide with a mix of awe and terror. The royal vanguard has crossed the border. Aveline wrung out her bloody rag. "The Alpha King?" "Yes," Maeve nodded rapidly. "King Lucius. They say he is touring the northern territories, demanding fealty from the regional alphas. But there is a rumor. They say he is looking for a bride, an Omega." Aveline's heart gave a strange, painful flutter. An Omega? Alpha Kings mated with powerful Luna wolves, daughters of generals and warlords. They did not marry Omegas. "They say he has inspectors checking the scent of every woman of age," Maeve continued, scrubbing furiously as a guard passed by. "If the king arrives here, Lord Castor will lose his mind. He has been hiding taxes from the crown for years." Aveline swallowed hard. The Alpha King, a savage ruler known as the Black Hound of the Wastes. He was infamous for his brutality, for ripping the throats out of the traitors who had murdered his father. Aveline had no desire to ever cross paths with such a monster, but destiny, it seemed, had a cruel sense of humor. A week later, the horns sounded. A deep, resonant blast that shook the very foundations of the Shadowfell keep. The Alpha King had arrived at their gates. Castor Morland was in a frenzy. He ordered all the sick, the weak, and the battered to be hidden away. He wanted to present an image of a wealthy, prosperous, and flawless pack. "Get the Omega out of sight!" Castor roared in the courtyard, pointing a meaty finger at Aveline as she carried a heavy bucket of slop. Her cheek was currently bruised purple from a beating she had received from the head cook 2 days prior. "Lock her in the deep cells. If the king sees that bruised wretch, he will think I cannot control my own serfs. Lock her away until the vanguard leaves." Guards seized Aveline by the arms, dragging her down, deep into the bowels of the keep. Past the torture chambers, down into the lightless deep cells where the air was thick with mildew and despair. They threw her inside a heavy iron door, slammed it shut, and turned the key. Complete darkness enveloped her. Aveline curled into a ball on the freezing, wet stone, wrapping her arms around her knees. She was hidden, forgotten, just a rejected Omega buried alive in the dark. The great hall of Shadowfell was alight with hundreds of tallow candles. Tapestries had been unrolled to hide the damp stains on the walls. Castor Morland sat at the lower table, sweating profusely into his fur-lined collar, while the high table was occupied by the king and his vanguard. King Lucius Hawthorne was a terrifying sight. He did not wear the velvet and silks of traditional royalty. He wore boiled black leather and steel, bearing the scars of 100 battles. His golden eyes swept over the hall with a predatory calculation. The aura of his alpha power was so oppressive that half the wolves in the room were struggling to breathe, their instincts screaming at them to bare their necks in submission. Lucius was not here for the feast. He was here on a hunt. For 3 years, he had searched. He had visited the opulent courts of the southern packs, the nomadic tribes of the eastern steppes. He had smelled thousands of wolves, perfumes, roses, jasmine, rain, smoke, but never the wild lavender and mountain pine, never the scent of the little bird who had saved his life, the mate the moon goddess had tethered to his soul. His journey had taken him to Ironridge 2 days prior. He had sat at Desmond Mercer's table. Desmond had presented his finest warriors and his most beautiful female pack members. But when Lucius caught a faint, stale whiff of something familiar in the floorboards of the Ironridge keep, he had grabbed Desmond by the throat.
"Where is she?"
Lucius had snarled, lifting the alpha off his feet. "The one whose scent lingers in the stones of this hall." Terrified, choking, Desmond had confessed. He had sold his Omega stepsister to Shadowfell. He had sold the king's mate for meat and daggers. Lucius had ordered Desmond stripped of his rank and chained in his own dungeons, leaving a garrison of the vanguard to seize Ironridge. Then Lucius had ridden through the night, his beast clawing at his mind, desperate, furious, and terrified that he was too late. Now, he sat in Castor's hall. The air was thick with roasted meats, cheap ale, and the nervous sweat of the Shadowfell wolves. "My king," Castor stammered, raising a goblet, "we are honored by your presence. Shadowfell stands ready to serve the crown." Lucius did not touch his cup. He leaned forward, resting his chin on his scarred fist. He flared his nostrils, drawing in a deep breath. Underneath the stench of the feast, underneath the fear of the pack, there it was, faint, buried, but unmistakable. Wild lavender. Lucius stood up. The scraping of his heavy wooden chair against the stone silenced the entire hall instantly. Musicians stopped playing. Castor went pale. "Where is she?" Lucius's voice was deathly quiet, yet it carried to every corner of the room. "My king?" Castor stuttered, standing up so fast he knocked over his chair. "Who do you speak of?" Lucius vaulted over the high table with terrifying speed, landing directly in front of Castor. He grabbed the rival Alpha by the front of his tunic, his golden eyes glowing in the candlelight. "The Omega from Ironridge. Aveline, where is she?" Castor's heart hammered a frantic rhythm. He had hidden her. He had locked a bruised, worthless slave in the dark, and now the Alpha King was asking for her by name. She. "She is but a servant, my king. A clumsy, worthless thing. I did not want her presence to offend you." "If she is harmed," Lucius interrupted, his voice dropping to a monstrous, guttural growl that made the stone walls vibrate, "I will rip your spine from your body and wear it as a belt. Take me to her, now." The descent into the dungeons was frantic. Castor, flanked by terrified guards, fumbled with heavy iron ring of keys. Lucius followed, his vanguard drawing their swords, their heavy footfalls echoing ominously in the stairwell. As they descended deeper, the air grew colder, fouler. The scent of lavender grew stronger, but it was laced with the metallic tang of blood, fear, and deep, profound sorrow. Lucius's wolf raged against his human consciousness, demanding to be let out to slaughter everyone in the keep. They reached the lowest level. Castor's trembling hands finally found the key to the deep cell. The heavy iron door groaned open, revealing pitch blackness. Lucius pushed Castor aside, throwing the Alpha against the damp wall, and grabbed a torch from a guard. He stepped into the freezing cell. In the furthest corner, a tiny figure was huddled into a tight ball, shivering violently in the damp cold. She was wearing ragged, filthy burlap. Her bare feet were blue from the chill. At the sudden light, she threw her arms over her face, whimpering, a sound that drove an ice pick directly into Lucius's heart. "No more, please," Aveline begged in a raspy whisper, thinking it was Castor's guards coming to beat her again. "I'll scrub the floors, please." Lucius dropped the torch. It clattered against the stone, casting long, flickering shadows. He fell to his knees in the filth, not caring about his leathers or his crown. He crawled the last few feet toward her, moving slowly, deliberately, reining in his massive aura so he wouldn't terrify her further. "Little bird," he whispered. Aveline froze. She lowered her arms slowly. In the flickering torchlight, she saw the broad shoulders, the dark hair, and the molten gold eyes she had never forgotten. The man from the cave, the monster she had healed. Only now he wore the crest of the Alpha King. Lucius reached out with a trembling hand, gently brushing a matted lock of hair from her face. When his fingers grazed her cheek, he felt the raised, swollen bruise. The rage that spiked in him was apocalyptic, but he forced it down, focusing entirely on the fragile woman in front of him. "I looked everywhere for you," Lucius said, his voice breaking. He pulled off his heavy, fur-lined cloak and wrapped it gently around her shivering shoulders. "I tore this world apart looking for my mate." Aveline stared at him, her lips parted in shock. "Mate?" she breathed. "But I am an Omega. I am rejected. I was sold." Lucius carefully gathered her into his massive arms, lifting her against his chest as if she were made of spun glass. He buried his face in her neck, inhaling the scent he had dreamed of for 3 long years. "You are not rejected," the king vowed, standing up and turning to face the doorway where Castor and his guards stood frozen in terror. "You are the queen of the Lycan territories, and everyone who has ever raised a hand to you is about to find out what it means to cross my mate." The silence that followed King Lucius's declaration was absolute. It was a heavy, suffocating quiet, broken only by the ragged, uneven breaths of the terrified Alpha of Shadowfell. Castor Morland backed away slowly, his large hands trembling, his face drained of all color. He looked from the monstrous king, kneeling in the filth, to the bruised, trembling Omega, wrapped in the royal fur cloak. Lucius did not rush. His rage was not a fiery, uncontrolled explosion. It was a glacier, cold, crushing, and utterly unstoppable. He stood, keeping Aveline tucked securely against his chest. She weighed practically nothing. The realization that she had been starved and worked to the bone under his very nose sent a fresh wave of murderous intent through the king's veins. He held her with one arm, his large hand cradling the back of her head, pressing her face into his neck so she would not have to witness the violence to come. "Vanguard." Lucius's voice was a low rumble that resonated through the damp stone of the dungeon. Instantly, heavily armored warriors stepped forward, their swords drawn, their eyes glowing with the predatory light of their wolves. They formed an impenetrable wall behind their king. "Seize him," Lucius ordered, his golden eyes locking onto Castor. "Drag him to the Great Hall. I want his entire pack to see what happens when a lesser alpha harms the mate of the king." Castor did not go quietly. Panic overtook his survival instincts, and his wolf surged forward in a desperate bid for freedom. He let out a feral roar, his bones cracking as he attempted to shift in the narrow corridor. But the royal vanguard was composed of the most elite, battle-hardened Lycans on the continent. Before Castor could fully transform, 3 massive warriors descended upon him. Heavy iron gauntlets struck his jaw, shattering teeth and snapping his transformation in half. They bound his arms with thick silver chains, the metal burning his flesh, and dragged him up the stairs. Lucius followed at a measured pace. Aveline clung to his leather armor, her small fingers curled tightly into the straps. The scent of wild lavender and mountain pine was now completely enveloped by the rich, comforting scent of rain and ozone that belonged to Lucius. For the first time in years, the crushing weight of anxiety in Aveline's chest began to ease. The monster she had healed in the cave was holding her, and he was the most powerful man in the world. When they emerged into the great hall, the scene was one of utter pandemonium. The musicians had fled, the tables were overturned, and the members of the Shadowfell Pack were huddled in the corners, surrounded by the king's soldiers. Castor was thrown to the center of the room, landing hard on his knees before the high table. Blood dripped from his mouth, staining the stone floor. Lucius walked slowly to the center of the hall. He motioned for his lead commander, a scarred warrior named General Montgomery, to step forward. "Hold her," Lucius commanded softly. He carefully transferred Aveline into the general's arms. Montgomery, a giant of a man who had slaughtered hundreds in battle, held the fragile Omega with the utmost reverence, averting his eyes in a show of deep respect for his queen. Lucius turned back to Castor. He unbuckled his sword belt and let it fall to the floor with a heavy clang. He would not use steel for this. "My king, have mercy," Castor begged, spitting blood onto the flagstones. "I did not know. Desmond Mercer traded her to me. I thought she was just a rogue, a broken Omega. If I had known she was yours." "If you had known she was mine, you would have treated her like a queen," Lucius interrupted, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "But because you thought she was a nobody, you threw her in a lightless cell. You starved her. You allowed your people to strike her." Lucius took a slow step forward. "The measure of a leader is not how he treats his equals, Castor. It is how he treats those he believes have no power at all. You have failed as an alpha. You have failed as a wolf." Desperation made Castor foolish. His eyes darted to the overturned table nearby, where the spoils of his trade with Ironridge had been displayed to boast to his generals earlier that evening. Among the spilled goblets and plates lay the 12 silver-forged daggers Desmond had traded for Aveline's life. With a guttural scream, Castor lunged. He snatched one of the silver daggers from the floor and thrust it upward, aiming directly for the king's heart. Gasps echoed through the hall. Aveline let out a terrified cry, struggling against General Montgomery's hold. "Lucius," but the Alpha King did not even flinch. Moving with a speed that defied his massive size, Lucius's hand shot out. He caught Castor's wrist mid-thrust. The sound of bones splintering echoed through the quiet hall as Lucius crushed the Alpha's arm with his bare hand. Castor screamed in agony, dropping the silver dagger. It clattered harmlessly to the floor. Lucius did not let go. He yanked Castor forward, his golden eyes blazing with untethered fury. "You traded 12 daggers for her life," Lucius whispered, his voice dark and deadly. He kicked the fallen dagger away. "Your life is not even worth one." With a swift, brutal motion, Lucius struck. It was a display of pure, ancient Lycan power. He did not shift, but his claws extended, tearing through Castor's throat with lethal precision. The rival Alpha choked, his eyes rolling back as he collapsed onto the stone, life leaving his body in seconds. The great hall descended into absolute silence. No one moved. No one breathed. Lucius wiped his hands on a linen cloth, handed to him by a soldier. He turned his gaze upon the trembling members of the Shadowfell Pack. "Your Alpha is dead," he declared, his voice carrying absolute authority. His lands, his resources, and his people now belong directly to the crown. Any who wish to challenge this may step forward now and join him. Not a single soul moved. Slowly, one by one, the wolves of Shadowfell dropped to their knees, baring their necks in total submission to the Alpha King. Lucius turned his back on them. He walked over to General Montgomery and gently took Aveline back into his arms. She was staring at him, her gray eyes wide, processing the terrifying violence she had just witnessed. But as she looked at Lucius, she did not see a monster. She saw the man who had just dismantled her personal hell. "Let us go home, my little bird," Lucius murmured, pressing a soft kiss to her forehead. "You have been in the dark for far too long." The journey to the capital city of Whitewater was a stark contrast to Aveline's miserable trip to Shadowfell. She traveled in the king's personal carriage, swathed in thick furs and velvet blankets. The royal physician, Dr. Percival Montgomery, attended to her injuries with the utmost care, applying soothing salves to her bruises and providing nutrient-rich broths to heal her malnourished body. Lucius rarely left her side. He rode beside the carriage during the day, checking on her at every stop, and slept in the carriage with her at night, his massive wolf form providing a living, breathing heater that kept the biting winter chill at bay. Under his fiercely protective care, Aveline's physical wounds began to heal, but her spirit remained hesitant. When the towering white spires of Whitewater Keep finally came into view, nestled against the side of a massive snow-capped mountain, Aveline felt a profound sense of inadequacy wash over her. "I cannot be your queen, Lucius," she whispered one evening as they stood on the balcony of his opulent royal chambers. She was dressed in a gown of soft blue silk, a far cry from the burlap she had worn weeks ago. "I am an Omega. I do not have the commanding aura of a Luna. The nobility will never accept me." Lucius wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on the top of her head. "They will accept you because you are my mate, and because they will soon realize what I already know. True strength does not always roar, Aveline. Sometimes, true strength is the hands that heal." His words were put to the test the very next week. The High Council of Whitewater was composed of ancient, wealthy, aristocratic families. They were proud, arrogant, and deeply traditional. When Lucius officially introduced Aveline as his fated mate and the future queen, the pushback was immediate and veiled in polite hostility. During a formal banquet, Lord Gregory Langdon, a powerful duke from the Eastern Territories, stood up to offer a toast. He held his crystal goblet high, his eyes gleaming with condescension. "We raise our glasses to our king, and to his." "Surprising choice of companion," Lord Langdon sneered softly. "It is an ancient tradition that the Alpha King mates with a warrior, a Luna who can lead armies and command respect. We must pray that our new Omega does not weaken the crown's standing in these perilous times." Aveline felt her cheeks burn with shame. She looked down at her plate, wishing the floor would swallow her whole. Lucius let out a low, warning growl, his hand drifting toward the hilt of his sword, but before he could act, the heavy oak doors of the banquet hall crashed open. 3 soldiers from the border patrol stumbled into the room, their armor battered and coated in dark, unnatural blood. They collapsed onto the marble floor, gasping for air. "Treason!" one of the soldiers choked out, clutching his swollen, blackened throat. "The Western rebels. They ambushed the patrols. They used poison, nightshade, and black ash venom." Panic erupted in the hall. Dr. Percival Montgomery rushed forward, kneeling beside the convulsing soldiers. He examined their blackened veins and the thick, frothy blood spilling from their lips. The physician's face went pale. "My king," Dr. Montgomery said, his voice trembling. "Black ash venom is incredibly rare. I do not have the antidote prepared. It takes days to brew, and these men have less than an hour before the poison reaches their hearts." The nobility gasped. Lord Langdon looked horrified. "Then they are dead," the Duke whispered. Lucius looked grim, but a sudden movement caught his eye. Aveline stood up. She did not hesitate. The timid, frightened Omega who had stared at her plate moments ago was gone, replaced by the healer who had saved an Alpha King in a dark cave 3 years prior. She rushed down the steps of the high table, dropping to her knees beside the dying soldiers, ruining her expensive silk gown in the blood. She placed her hands over the chest of the nearest soldier and closed her eyes. "Aveline, what are you doing?" Lord Langdon demanded. "Get away from them! You are embarrassing the crown!" "Silence!" Lucius roared, his voice shaking the chandeliers. Aveline ignored the Duke completely. She called upon her Omega energy, a unique, deeply empathetic magic, tied directly to the moon goddess. While Alphas possessed powers of destruction and command, rare, true Omegas possessed the power of restoration and purification. It was a lost art, suppressed by generations of Alpha dominance. A soft, ethereal silver light began to emanate from Aveline's palms, The hall fell deathly quiet as the nobles watched in shock. The light spread from her hands into the soldier's chest, tracing the blackened veins up to his throat. Aveline took a deep breath, absorbing a fraction of the pain, her own face paling as she forced her healing energy into the warrior's bloodstream. She was physically neutralizing the black ash venom. Within minutes, the soldier's violent convulsions ceased. The unnatural black coloring receded from his skin, replaced by a healthy flush. He took a deep, shuddering breath and opened his eyes, staring up at Aveline with tears in his eyes. "My queen," he whispered, coughing lightly. Aveline smiled warmly, wiping the sweat from her brow. She moved immediately to the next soldier, and then the next, repeating the exhausting process until all three men were breathing normally, pulled back from the very brink of death. When she finally stood up, she swayed slightly on her feet from exhaustion. Lucius was there in an instant, catching her in his arms, his eyes burning with an intense mixture of pride and awe. The entire banquet hall was dead silent. The arrogant nobility, who had just mocked her minutes before, were staring at her as if she had descended from the heavens. They had never seen such pure, unadulterated healing power. Lord Langdon, his face pale and his pride shattered, slowly sank to his knees. He bowed his head low, pressing his forehead to the marble floor. "Forgive me, my queen," Langdon whispered, his voice full of genuine reverence. "I was blind. You are a true blessing from the moon goddess." One by one, every lord, lady, and general in the room followed suit, dropping to their knees until only Lucius and Aveline remained standing. She had not conquered them with fear or violence. She had conquered them with mercy. The final piece of the king's retribution took place a month later in the grand courtyard of Whitewater Keep. Desmond Mercer, former Alpha of Ironridge, was dragged before the throne in heavy iron chains. He was gaunt, filthy, and broken after weeks in the royal dungeons. When he was forced to his knees, he looked up and saw Aveline sitting beside Lucius on a throne of carved oak and silver. She wore a crown of intertwined silver branches, looking every bit the radiant, powerful queen she was meant to be. Desmond trembled, fully expecting Lucius to execute him on the spot. "Desmond Mercer," Lucius began, his voice echoing across the silent courtyard. "You stole from the crown. You abused a member of your own pack. You sold my fated mate for provisions. The penalty for such treason is death." Desmond squeezed his eyes shut, bracing for the executioner's blade. "However," Lucius continued, turning his head to look at Aveline, "the queen has requested the right to pass judgment upon you." Desmond's eyes snapped open. He looked at his stepsister, a pathetic glimmer of hope in his eyes. "Aveline, please," he croaked. "I am your brother." Aveline looked at the man who had tormented her for years. She felt no anger, only a profound sense of pity. She stood up and walked down the steps of the dais, stopping a few feet from him. "You are not my brother Desmond," Aveline said, her voice clear and steady. "A brother protects his pack. A brother does not sell his family to monsters." She took a deep breath. "You deserve death for what you did to me and to the people of Ironridge. But I will not stain my hands or my king's hands with your blood. You are stripped of your alpha title. You are stripped of your pack name. You are banished from the unified territories forever. You will live the rest of your days as a nameless rogue in the southern wastes. If you ever cross the border again, you will be hunted down like an animal." Desmond gasped, realization dawning on him. For an alpha, being stripped of his pack and forced to live as a lone rogue in the barren wastes was a fate worse than a quick death. It was a life of eternal isolation and madness. "Take him away," Aveline ordered softly. As the guards dragged the screaming, sobbing Desmond out of the courtyard, Lucius stepped down and stood beside his queen. He took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. The cheers of the Whitewater Pack began to erupt around them, echoing off the mountain peaks, celebrating the rise of the Omega Queen who had healed their king's heart and secured their future. What an incredible journey for Aveline, from a rejected Omega sold for scraps to the most revered queen the Lycan territories have ever seen, proving that true power comes in many forms. If you loved this dramatic tale of revenge, healing, and fated mates, please like this video, share it with your friends, and hit that subscribe button so you never miss another epic romance story.